Good day, IM2 student. Today we will start with our module 2.3 Solving Absolute Value Inequalities. Day 1, Content Standard. Solve one variable equation and inequality involving absolute value, graphing the solutions, and interpreting them in context. Language objective. Match absolute value equations and inequalities with their graph. Explaining and justify reasoning. Okay. Example 1. Solving absolute value inequality graphically. You can use a graph to solve an absolute value inequality of the form f of x greater than g of x or f of x is less than g of x, where f of x is an absolute value function and g of x is a constant function. Graph each function separately on a same coordinate plane and determine the interval on the x-axis where one graph lies above or below the other. For f of x greater than g of x, you want to find the value, x value in which the graph f of x is above the graph of g of x. So here we see that if f of x greater than g of x, we want the graph to be f of x to be above g of x. Right? And for f of x is less than g of x, you want to find the x value for which the graph f of x is below the graph of x. So if f of x is less than g of x, we want the graph to be below the g of x. Okay, so let's go through our first example. Solve the inequality graphically. So we see that this is our f of x is equal to x plus 3 plus 1, and now g of x is equal to 4. So this is greater than, right? So then the vertex for this is -3 and 1, and the graph is already given to us. So then we see that this graph here is our f of x, and this graph here is our g of x. But then we see that it's f of x is greater than g of x, so then we want it to be above the graph of g of x. So above, that means that we're looking for this area here and this area here. So then we see that they intersect at this point. So that means that x is greater than 0, and we also see this point. So we use the word or. X is less than -6. Let's go on to example 1b. So we have absolute value of x minus 2 minus 3 is less than 1. So our f of x function is equal to absolute value of x minus 2 minus 3, and our g of x is 1. So then we use less than, so that means that we're looking for below the graph, right? So from here we know that the vertex is 2 and -3. So then to graph, so we have 2, -3 is this point here. Okay, so then from our previous lesson, we need to transform this into xb plus h and ya plus k. Right, so now our first point will be 1 times 1 plus 2, and 1 times 1 minus 3. So we have a point 3, -2. And the other point going from -1, 1. So we'll go to the same xb plus h and ya plus k. So we have -1 times 1 plus 2 and 1 times 1 minus 3. So we have 1 comma -2. So we have 3 -2. So we have this point, and we have 1 -2 this point. So then we know that we have our graph here. Okay, and we have the graph g of x is 1. Right? You notice that they intersect at this point and this point, but then remember that less than we want below the graph. So then that means that we want all of these here. Okay, and send it all together. We see that x is less than 5 and x is greater than -1, or we can write it as x is greater than -1 and less than 5. So actually we want you guys to write your answer in this form. Right. Let's go to, okay, so come ahead, you guys try this out on your own. Solve each inequality graphically. My mistake. But then we want less than or equal to, so that means that we're looking for below the graph. Right? So then the vertex for this graph is 0, 0. So it's 0, 0 here. Okay, and we want to go xb plus h and ya plus k. Right, so in this k we have 0 times 1 plus 0, so we have a okay, I made a mistake here, so let me change that. This is 1 times 1 plus a 0 and 1 times 2 plus a 0. So we have 0.12, and at the point we go -1 times 1 plus a 0 and 1 times 2 plus a 0. So we have point -1 and 2. So that this is a 2 point we need to graph. So 1, 2, this point, and -1, 2, this point. So then we have, this is our graph. Right. Okay, and then g of x is 6. So then let me do that in blue. So then we have this point, our g of x. Right, and sin is less than or equal to, we're looking for the one that's below the graph, so then all of these are below the graph. So intersect at this point and this point, so we say that x is less than or equal to 3 and x is greater than or equal to -3. So we write it x greater than or equal to -3 and less than or equal to 3. Okay, number 5, so come ahead, we gotta try this one out. Keep on writing wrong. Right, less than or equal to, so we're looking for below the graph. Okay, so the vertex is -1, -4, right? And we go from 1, 1 to xb plus h, ya plus k. So we have 1 times 1 minus 1, and 1 times 1 minus 4. So we have 0 and -3. We go from -1, 1, so we have -1 times 1 minus 1, and 1 times 1 minus 4. So we have, oops, my mistake again. So we have a -2 and -3. Right, so let's make a rough sketch of our graph. Okay, so the vertex is -1, 1, 2, 3, 4 is here, and 0, -3, and -2 and -3. So our graph will do something like this, right? Okay, and gonna go over -3 here for G, -2, my mistake. Right, so it's gonna intersect at this point and at this point. And sin is less than, so we're looking for below the graph. So it's gonna be all of these. It's gonna be x, it's gonna be less than or equal to 2, and x is greater than or equal to -2. Okay, so we're going to write x is greater than or equal to -2, less than or equal to 2. Okay, so come you can try this one out on your own. Right, so when you guys do this at home, it's easy if you guys use a graphing paper and a ruler. Okay? So less than, so we're looking for below the graph. So our A is 1/2, B is 1, H is 0, and K is 2. So the vertex can be at 0, 2. I'm going to go from 1, 1 to XB plus H, YA plus K. So 1 times 1 plus a 0, and 1 times 1/2 plus 2, so then we get 1 and 2.5. Other one, -1, 1, go XB plus H and YA plus K. So we're going to be -1 times 1 plus a 0 and 1 times 1/2 plus a 2. So this gives us a -1 and 2.5. Right, so the vertex is at 0, 2, and then 1 and 2.5, so then it's here. And the other one is -1 and 2.5, so it's here. Right. Okay, so our graph can do something like this. Right, and then this is when y is 3 and when g of x is 3, so we have this graph. So they intersect at this point and this point, but we want to be below the graph. So then this point is x is less than or equal to 1.5, and this point x is greater than or equal to -1.5. So we write x is greater than or equal to, there's no equal to, so my mistake, so let me erase the equal sign. So x is greater than -1.5 and less than 1.5. Okay, so that's the end of our 2.3 day 1. Right, so then some teacher will assign you book work, some will not, but we will always assign you an XRW. Right, so your XRW will be on 2.3, and we need you to copy down day 2 notes for 2.3.